Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Devine. I work for the Aleut community of St. Paul Island, which is a tribal government in the middle of the Bering Sea of Alaska. I'm currently presenting from Anchorage, Alaska, and on Dena'ina lands, but I live and work on Ununga lands in St. Paul. And today I get the pleasure of presenting to you over 20 years of work that we have been doing to develop and operate a Guardians program in the Pribolof Islands of Alaska. Here is kind of a view of St. Paul. You can see we're located in the middle of the Bering Sea in this little red box on the inset, right on the continental shelf in the middle of the ocean. Beautiful place to be and quite rich. We have a community of about 450 people, a processing plant for snow crab and king crab. We process halibut. And we have a tribal government, a municipal city government, and a village corporation that operate all locally, and a school of about 65 children from K through 12. We are a subsistence kind of mixed economy. So we have a robust commercial fisheries that operate in our area. We operate a longline halibut commercial fishery that also executes subsistence fishing for our families at the same time. We are marine mammal hunting and hunting seabirds for meat, but also collecting eggs from several seabird species that breed on the islands, and generally just hunting, fishing, and foraging on the lands. We also have a reindeer herd that was brought over in the early 1900s that's still very healthy today. One of the keystone species of the Pribolof Islands are the northern fur seals. Over 75% of the world's breeding population occur on St. Paul and our sister island, St. George, to the south. And we have hundreds of thousands of these beautiful animals that occur naturally on the Pribolof Islands. And it was this species, there's a sea lion hiding out in that middle photo, if you can tell which animal that is. But it was northern fur seals that started this idea and this desire for the communities and the tribes of St. Paul and St. George to come together and create a Guardians program. We needed a voice at the table of management and research that was occurring on the islands from external agencies and entities, and really just to bring a voice to the communities and to the original stewards of the lands and waters of the islands around the management of this species in particular. And that's really where the Indigenous Sentinels Network was born. And as it was kind of envisioned by the tribal governments, we kind of realized that what's really needed is not just unique to our islands or our communities, but we need tools for remote communities to implement long-term monitoring programs that record environmental and biological data in a way to effectively communicate that information. And so this program was created over the last 20 plus years with two foundations. First, that we need both traditional and Indigenous knowledge and Western science. It's not an either or proposition, and one is not over or either instead of the other. But we need both of them. They're two sides of the same coin. And the second foundation was really that local buy-in, and that this needed to be community driven. Most conservation efforts are doomed without that local support when we're talking conservation and sustainability, resilience of the ecosystem. And so we really rooted the program and the development of it in those foundations. The program has taken quite a history of development, and it started as this originally envisioned around marine mammals, a way to put information onto paper. And that included everything from Western science information, numbers of animals, locations of animals. We track subsistence harvest information in this way, but also animal behaviors and context for that, local and traditional knowledge that provides context to weird or anomalous behaviors that were observed, timing, if something was showing up in unusual places or times. And all of this information originally started on paper and moved to a database in MS Access to handheld portable data assistance And as we began to see that we were having success in documenting information that was helpful for our decision making, for creating baseline assessment or making baseline assessments with and making these local decisions with, we started expanding the program. So we began looking at using it for preventing rats on our islands, which is a huge invasive species threat and concern of ours. And so we expanded from looking and monitoring marine mammals to implementing a rigorous rat prevention program on our island. As we came into the technology of mobile apps, of using tablets and different devices in the field that could operate without having to be on a Wi-Fi or data, as we have no Wi-Fi or data on most of the island. And we need programs that operate outside of that kind of capability and technology. We were able to just start developing apps to our specific needs. And so we've continued to expand. As we realized that this was a tool that other tribes may be interested in, we began reaching out to others in our region and bringing on additional tribes to create their own programs with their own priorities and surveys designed to meet their needs. And we've developed everything from coastal erosion monitoring to sea duck and gull surveys to environmental threats assessments and looking for beached or oiled animals on shorelines. And it's really taken a very customized and flexible and diverse function now, as each tribe or each community is able to design and meet their own needs. But have this series of components that really provide the container for housing data in a secure way. So we have a password protected database. We have the apps that are ready to plug and play and are very customizable to each community so that each community is getting exactly what it needs. We are meeting our needs and have different uses for the different surveys that we do. And all of it goes into a single database where our community own the data and are able to access training, technical assistance, and communication, have help creating things like public service announcements and Facebook posts and reaching out to other communities and coordinating our monitoring and our efforts and sharing information. And that's all built into the Indigenous Sentinels Network team. Here's a map of some of the communities that have implemented the Indigenous Sentinels Network. And again, we realized that we had this suite of tools that really were useful and needed to be out in the world. And so we set upon, just within the last probably 5 years, trying to get these tools into the hands of communities that need them the most. And you can see we've expanded. We started in the middle of the Bering Sea and went out to the Aleutian Chain south of us to a series of our sister islands, and then into the mainland of Alaska. And we're even working now on projects with Russian and Canadian First Nation partners. So we're going both sides of the border, and we're looking transboundary. There's a lot of benefits to data collection. There's a lot of areas where we feel Indigenous Sentinels Network fills a specific niche, and that's that this is truly a tribally government owned and operated grassroots type designed program. It was designed from a tribe, and so it's designed to be used by tribes. It's secured. It's addressed a lot of data sovereignty and data ownership issues. And we've created the guides and the paperwork to outline all of those types of things that are real concerns for our tribes with intellectual property, with confidential and sensitive subsistence data and information that we don't want to be made public. But the program itself is really flexible and customizable to meet the priorities and needs of each community or each organization that's implementing it. And it really, as we're thinking of Guardians programs, and we have great worldwide examples, this is something that's important, is that we need some standardization, but we also need to be flexible and adaptable so that communities are addressing their own needs and issues around food security, around economic resilience and sustainability infrastructure. We have a lot of complex needs and priorities, and being able to address those and document and have data to make decisions from is really important and powerful for our tribes. It also helps to facilitate partnerships and things like recalling data for reporting, helps with funding, helps with building those partnerships that need positive reinforcement. And, we have these standard reporting timelines and deadlines, and it's a handy one-stop shop to be able to access visuals, graphics, charts, tables, to pull information that are contained within the database from. Of course, I said earlier, confidential data are protected with strong paperwork and memorandums of agreements and understanding and data sharing agreements and all of the necessary paperwork that we maybe aren't necessarily equipped to deal with. And again, what we've really realized out of it is it's been able to strengthen our partnerships, not only with other tribes and communities, but with our agency and resource managers, as well as external researchers that we invite into our community to work with us on scientific research. I want to provide kind of what does it look like to put an observation into our database? And I'm going to use the example of a stranded marine mammal observed on a shoreline to do this with. And so what you see here is a series of screens. We've designed this to be very simple. We want it all to work offline, and we don't want to lose any data in the process. And so we've created very simple drop-down screens, easily clickable buttons, so that in inclement weather, users are able to access and get the information into the database that they need to. So you start with, again, your login and password, as everything is owned by the community. And so you get admitted into your community, where you can enter a series of general information, environmental information, and then continue on to log your observation. And so here we have these easy to navigate buttons, and the drop-down menus are, as they can be, automatically filled in. Or they are drop and automatically fill in. So as soon as the user clicks the button, they may get a series of drop-down menus, or they may get something that's auto-filled to help save time in the field. And as you navigate through the buttons, you can, for instance, get an internal GPS data from your device rather than having to plug in an external instrument. So we tried to make it as simple as possible. And as you navigate through the screens, this is particular to a marine mammal observation. So the screens that I see are going to be specifically detailed for that observation. And all of these options are things that our community has decided to include in the database. So if I am a user in Arctic Village in the interior of Alaska, I will not be seeing marine mammal drop-down menus. I will not be getting buttons that are not useful to me. It will be customized to my needs, which might have to do with caribou or moose rather than a marine mammal. And this is all fully customizable for just the information that the community needs. I want to give a couple of examples of how we have used these data for St. Paul, because I think that really paints the picture of the utility and the diversity of the data that this database can hold and what this program does. And when we're thinking guardians, we know it's got to be diverse. We're not just looking at one thing. We often want to address multiple parts of the ecosystem. So the first example is right here in the harbor. There's a big yellow star right at our city dock, where we conduct water quality assessment on a weekly basis. And we are doing this to kind of establish a baseline data set for what kind of water quality, particularly temperature and salinity and chlorophyll, we experience throughout the year. This is, of course, when our island isn't covered in ice, which it currently is at the moment. So you'll see holes in our data set from when we simply can't get out and make these measurements. But what has been really interesting is we've been conducting the same casts of an instrument that collects conductivity, temperature, and depth, and gives us a profile of the water column with how salty it is and how warm or cold it is. And over time, what we have been able to assess is that we're seeing a creep in salinity, meaning the waters of St. Paul are getting saltier. And the reason for that is this is actually showing a real phenomena that we're experiencing because of a lack of sea ice. Every year, historically, the sea ice pack came all the way down into the Bering Sea from the Chukchi and Beaufort in the Arctic Ocean, surrounded our islands, and put a lot of fresh water into the system. We have had a complete lack of sea ice around the islands for 10 years now. This is the first year since 2011 that we have had sea ice come down to St. Paul. And because of that long-term lack of input of fresh water every year into our system, we're seeing this in our data, that we're seeing an increase in salinity, which can have real implications on our fish species and our crab species, our whole marine ecosystem, as we're looking at this change in the ecosystem. Another really interesting example comes from our fur seals. This was a collaboration that we undertook with the National Marine Fisheries Service and with Alaska Fisheries Science Center Marine Mammal Laboratory. So this is a NOAA entity. And every year we have annual pup counts. We have researchers that come out and spend a significant amount of the summertime, but again, just a snapshot of the year on the island, conducting research. And we are running our own surveys and programs. One of those surveys is pup departure, and looking at the timing of when our animals are leaving to migrate for their overwinter migrations out into the North Pacific, broader North Pacific Ocean. They migrate and spend the entire winter at sea. And they leave after they are born. They're born in the summer, they're nursed throughout the summer, they're weaned in the fall, they learn how to swim, they learn how to dive and fish and catch fish. And then they spend their entire next year to 2 years out all the way down into California, out in the broader North Pacific. And what's really interesting is this project was a modeling exercise. So this is all theoretical information. The dotted lines that you see are just estimates that have been fitted to kind of guess at when pups should be leaving the island. And the solid line with the triangles are our weekly observations of going out, looking at pup behavior, seeing how many pups are in the water versus on land, and looking at and counting the number of pups that are on specific areas of our island. The red comments that you see there are actual information that provide context to the observation. So you can see there was a huge dip at the end of October, and this is in the year 2017, where our island sentinels noted that on this particular day of the survey, it was a rough day, and most of the seals were out in the water, which is what we know is a typical behavior for pups to go and seek refuge in really inclement weather and just stay out and swim around until the storm is over. And so our observation is quite low, and it's lower than expected by the model. And the reason for that is because of the weather. Most of the times when we are looking and counting numbers, you can see they track what's estimated quite well. So this was really a way to kind of ground truth and verify a model that the agency had no access to these data, but we have this great robust data set. And we actually were able to repeat this over a number of years because we've been doing the surveys since 2016. We were able to repeat it every year to present day. In looking at ways to strengthen this program, which of course this has been such an evolution over the history of the Indigenous Sentinels Network as a program, and as we've expanded and brought on more communities and learned about different surveys and protocols and ways that we can really expand the flexibility of the container, of the database and the apps to meet the needs of our users. We've looked at things like push notifications. So being able to communicate and alert sentinels or guardians in these communities on the ground in our remote locations to collect specific information that might be really useful for agencies for something like forecasting or modeling predictions, to improve our modeling and forecasting around storms, for example. We also are looking at enhancing the mapping capability. We know that maps are very strong visuals, and a lot of times our tribes lack the capacity to create very technical GIS or other type of mapping components. And then one thing that we have been very strongly advocating for is looking at guardians or sentinels or whatever type of environmental professionals you want to give the title to, that those are experts in their field and are doing and collecting very critical and high quality information, and that information needs to be valued. And how can we create easy payment methods, whether that's stipend or honoraria or a pay-per observation type direct payment? We are strengthening and expanding the different types of ways that we are able to provide compensation for observations and for anything from a volunteer to a full-time sentinel or guardian position to be able to implement these programs because they produce such valuable information. Along with all of those kind of capabilities, we're looking at just the visual and the aesthetics and the ease of using the program. And so we're looking at how do we update and streamline and kind of bring the Indigenous Sentinels Network into, the technological reality of today. So how do we create more of the social aspects, the capabilities that we need with the ease of use and the plug and play of things that look more like a social media type interface or platform. And so we're looking always at ways to kind of improve the aesthetics of our program with that. And I believe that is kind of the overview of Indigenous Sentinels Network. I want to acknowledge this has been such a long and evolving process. And we have had many, many funders and collaborators, partners, supporters, and I want to say kagalaku or thank you to all of those and recognize here you see a suite of local to national funding and supporters. And I'll leave this end slide up with my information. We're very interested in helping expand and make Guardians programs happen in other locations. And we want to get our tools out there as useful as they are to others. And so thank you so much for your time, and I'll stop there.
Goodness cheese. Thank you, Lauren. We really appreciate the work that's being done out there on St. Paul and St. George and with the Aleutian peoples. It's front runners and it's beautiful to watch. And I hope that everybody takes the time to learn how to engage with the program and adapt it to their traditional spaces. So have a great day.